being handled. That's all the information they should be giving out. And that's very hard for a board member. Very hard, because they really, really, really want to know what's going on. And you can tell them some things to the point where I would explain to them also, if this comes to be a hearing in front of you, I don't want you to be predetermined. I want you to be able to hear what's presented to you. I don't want you to jeopardize your ability to hear the case. Because if you go out there and you're giving opinions, any lawyer worth their salt is going to say, have you already formed an opinion? What do you know about this? So you have to insulate them from that. You have to let them do their job when it's time to do their job. And so it's very important that you have the trust of the board so that you can tell them, I'm aware of it, I'm handling it. And when it's time for you to know, I'll sure let you know. But what's more, and to build on that as well, you do not tell one board member something that you don't tell them all. Don't ever pull that, I got a favorite board member and I'll tell them, and then boy does that really disintegrate the trust on the board. So if you're telling one, you be willing to tell them all, but be very discerning what you're telling them until the appropriate time. And then when it's over and it's been resolved, you can let them know some details.
One of the things that I've dealt with over the course of my time at Bernie Davenport is board members who feel like, as they said, they should know more. After all, they're the ones that hired this person, so to speak, rather than the principal who they may have sat in on the interview, but the decisions are always mine. But they always, I've had board members go, well, can't I read the evaluation that you did? No. Well, why not? That's not what a board member does. And I've had to say at different times during my career too, you can't know these things because if it comes to a hearing, you can't sit on as the jury, judge and jury, if you know these things, because again, the lawyer is going to say, you already have this determination, you already know the situation too much, you're too involved, so you can't sit on any kind of panel to determine the fate of this particular person. Thankfully, I've never had anything go to a hearing, but I don't know how many times I've had to say to the board, you can't know this. You can't know it, you can't know it, you can't know it. And finally, thankfully, I don't have anybody coming to me and say, well, can I read their evaluation? I don't have that anymore. But it's an educational process. You have to educate your board as far as what their role is ultimately in this realm. There's a lot of education that needs to happen. If they don't go to the nice seminars or workshops that the School Boards Association puts on, or that ND puts on, or any of those NERCSA or administrator days, or any of those kinds of opportunities for education, if they don't go there, you're it. You're the teacher in that respect. You are the person who is informing them as far as what their role is, what their parameters, what their restrictions are. Sometimes they don't like it, but you have to make sure that that they know what they can and can't do. One of the other things that I've had to deal with, and unfortunately it's a bleed into some of the decisions that I get to make, is there was a situation years ago that really sort of soured the well for hiring purposes. We have now, the board has really been very specific and said, we will not hire spouses of administrators, regardless of whether they're in the Turning building or the Davenport building. We are not going to have a spouse of an administrator on our staff. And that really has limited necessarily the pool of teachers that we have. And I'll talk a little bit more about the limitations that I face with hiring teachers, but that really has colored a lot, and that's a board thing more than anything else. So, I mean, the teachers are there right along marching with them. They don't want one of their peers to be a spouse of an administrator, especially after this one incident, but that really has changed the hiring culture, the culture of HR in the building, and has impacted since then what I've been able to do in terms of hiring. So.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been shared. The board should not be involved in HR to any large extent. I mean, boards of education have three primary purposes, as you're all aware. They approve the budget, they approve policy, they hire, they fire, and they evaluate superintendents, period, and end of story. They have one employee and one employee alone, and that's us. The one notable exception, depending on the type of school district you're in, would be employee negotiations. I've worked in school districts where board member or board members, plural, are involved in negotiations, and in districts where they're not. I'm currently in a district where we do have a board HR subcommittee that's directly involved in negotiations. There are pros and cons to having board members involved in negotiations. We can talk about that if you like. I think back to Drew's original question, though, the climate, the culture that HR sets, it's absolutely critical, and what makes HR, at least from my opinion, so challenging is that they have to really toe the line between being so very positive, because they are the very first face that most of our employees will see when it comes to onboarding and processing and interviewing. And they're typically the last person that people see before they leave under circumstances both good and bad. So to find that happy balance between being welcoming and inviting and the best, putting the district's best foot forward, but also being the hammer when you need to be the hammer, that's tough, and that requires a really unique set of skills. I will tell you, the district that I work for, they're probably as aggressive as any district I've ever worked for in removing low-performing employees. And it's something that, and I say that not because I'm necessarily proud of it, but it is an important function. I've certainly worked places, and I'm sure you have as well, where I think sometimes in public education, because of the types of people we are, we tend to be a little too forgiving of low expectations and low performance. That if we just provide a little bit more training, if we just provide a little bit more support, and there's a time and a place for that, please don't get me wrong, but if you don't have an HR office that is willing and able and aggressive in identifying low performers and moving them out, then shame on us as leaders. Because everybody in the room knows how important it is to have a high-performing teacher in front of kids every day, and if we don't, then we do so at our own peril. So I think the whole climate and culture thing that Drew talked about, it's absolutely essential. Finding that happy balance between the positive, the inviting, and then being the bad cop when you need to be the bad cop, that's not easy.
Andy, I'd kick in there really quick. I had a principal tell me one time, you're talking about a certain employee, well, they're not hurting the kids. And to me, that was the wrong answer, or the wrong statement. I don't want to know if they're hurting, I want to know, are they taking them to that level where they need to be? And so, so there are those people that are coasting, and yeah, they're not doing anything bad or anything like that, but are they getting them where we need them? And that's super important. You know, I always think of this too. I think about this kind of stuff all the time. Are we hiring people, when we make a hire, do we want them to become more like our organization, or do we want our organization to become more like them? And that's just a question I would, you guys just maybe noodle on that question.
I guess we were talking about this subject, been all the time that I was a superintendent, but there was a question about a renewal or a cancellation. Since I was going to be called to testify, I would often, almost always in fact, I would go do an evaluation myself. One thing, because I really like me, and I have good judgment. and I'm good at teaching, so I would go and I would spend the time it takes. You know, and even on a marginal teacher, I spent 4 days in first grade modeling. Oh, golly. But, you know, to give them a chance. I was not an ogre as a superintendent. I was not a Queen of Hearts off with their head. People are not dispensable, they're not disposable, they're not despicable, but, just don't throw that in. But anyway, I did make it a point to evaluate them, and it would garner what the principals had seen. I was able to make sure that it was clear and concise, that it gave observations and commendations, but also areas of concern. And those areas of concerns had to be addressed, and there was a timetable for that to happen. And I never, ever had to go to a hearing in all the years, because I was always able to counsel them to either to be a better teacher or just counsel them out of the profession. So, and I had some cases that were quite disdainful. The other thing, since about talking about the board, was you can't let them shoot themselves in the foot, because again, you're protecting the district. And so, when I had an employee that the board wanted to get rid of, it was over infidelity, adultery, and it had to do with a couple other staff members and stuff. It was a Peyton place, if you remember that old show. So I had to let them know that when there was an affair with an administrator and a teacher, the teacher, no matter how bad they wanted to get rid of her, she was the victim. Legally, she's the victim. All she had to do was say, I was under duress, he promised me a promotion, he promised me he was gonna fire me if I didn't. All she had to say, and boom, she's gonna win. So it took a lot to cool that board down. You are not going to fire her, she may be reassigned, but not as a form of punishment, and we're gonna let this process work itself out. Of course, the administrators had to go, and they resigned, because even they knew that they had crossed the line. But the teacher who was involved, it took every bit of convincing and say, you gotta trust me on this, and backed up by the lawyer. And the lawyer would say, Sharp's right. You can't be, no matter how upset you are and how offended you are, you have to protect the district. Or you're just gonna give her the district's money, and that money needs to go for kids, and we're not gonna spend the money doing this. And so, even though it's really, really tough sometimes, you've got to insist that the board doesn't do anything so blatantly outrageous that they're gonna put the district at risk. And that takes strong convincing, but it takes the trust. If you didn't have your trust in the first place, they ain't gonna listen to you. It all goes back to that.
What is the role of the superintendent in developing leaders, and developing capacity of the staff that you're working with? Developing other leaders?
I'll take a stab at that one. I think it's arguably one of the single most important tasks we have as leaders is figuring out who to surround ourselves with and who's gonna follow in our footsteps. And you can't wait till you're near the end of your career, you can't wait till the middle part of your career, you need to do it from day one. One small example, I'm guessing the people to my left are doing something similar or have done something similar in their districts, but I think if you're not doing some type of a grow your own program to prepare for leadership positions, both formal and informal, then I think perhaps you're missing an opportunity. Millard has a really robust program, Ralston has a really robust program. We've had a program for a number of years. And it isn't necessarily just identifying teachers to be principals, though that's probably most frequently what we see. But we have a lot of teachers that want to explore leadership positions in terms of a department chair or a curriculum lead or a math coach, or leadership, as everyone around the room knows, takes lots and lots of different forms. So one of the things that we've done, in fact we've partnered with Ralston for a number of years, is a leadership cohort where it's an application process. We don't accept everyone, typically we accept about half, about 15 people a year. Finding that magic number is always difficult, but one of the things we do is we take them through a year-long program. We partner with UNO, they can get graduate credit for it, and we expose them to a variety of what we think, what we hope are genuine, authentic leadership opportunities. We draw pretty heavily from that pool. I will tell you that our philosophy from an HR perspective